The acrid smell of burning rubber stung Marcus Grant's nose as he stepped out of his sleek black SUV. The evening air in Willow Creek was thick with tension, the kind that clung to your skin like damp heat. He'd only been back in town for a week, but the whispers had already started, whispers about the black man in the tailored suit, driving a truck worth more than most houses on Main Street. Marcus, however, wasn't here for their gossip. He was here to settle old scores, not with fists, but with something far sharper: truth. Willow Creek hadn't changed in the 15 years since Marcus left. The same cracked sidewalks, the same faded diner sign, the same narrow minds. He'd grown up here, a kid who'd known hunger and hate in equal measure. Back then, he was just another face to be ignored, or worse, be the likes of Officers Dale Carter and Jim Brody. The two cops had ruled the town like petty kings, their badges a license to bully anyone who didn't fit their mold. Marcus had been their favorite target, a black teenager with too much fire in his eyes. They'd never forgotten him, and he sure as hell hadn't forgotten them. Now, Marcus was no longer that scrawny kid. He was a billionaire, a tech mogul whose name graced Forbes lists and whose investments quietly funded half the town, including the very precinct Carter and Brody called home. They didn't know that, of course. To them, he was still just a problem to be dealt with, a man whose success they couldn't stomach. It started with a traffic stop. Routine, they said. Carter's flashlight had lingered too long on Marcus's face, his smirk dripping with contempt. "Fancy truck for a guy like you," he'd sneered. Brody had chuckled, his hand resting on his holster. Marcus had stayed calm, his voice steady as he handed over his license. He knew the game. He'd played it his whole life. But when they let him go with a warning to watch himself, something in their eyes told him this wasn't over. It wasn't. 2 nights later, Marcus was driving home from a meeting with the mayor. Another secret he kept when he saw the glow. His truck, his pride, was parked outside the diner. Flames licked its frame, devouring the leather seats and custom paint. A crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of shock and fear. Carter and Brody stood front and center, the latter holding a lit torch like a trophy. The message was clear: you don't belong here. Marcus's heart pounded, not with fear, but with a rage he'd buried long ago. He stepped forward, the fire's heat searing his skin. "You think this breaks me?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the crackle of flames. Carter laughed, a sound like gravel underfoot. "Go back where you came from, boy," he spat. The word hit like a slap, but Marcus didn't flinch. He stood taller, his eyes locked on theirs. The crowd grew restless. A woman, Mrs. Ellis from the bakery, whispered to her neighbor, "That's Marcus Grant." The Marcus Grant. The name rippled through the onlookers, confusion replacing fear. Carter's smirk faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" he barked, but the doubt in his voice was unmistakable. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke calmly. "Sheriff, it's Marcus. I need you at the diner. Now." Minutes later, Sheriff Lawson arrived, his face grim. He wasn't one of Carter and Brody's cronies, answered to the county, and more importantly, to Marcus, whose donations kept the sheriff's department afloat. "Arrest them," Marcus said, his voice low but unyielding. Lawson hesitated, glancing at the burning truck, then at the officers. "On what grounds?" he asked. Marcus's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "Arson, destruction of property. And when the paperwork comes out, you'll find that truck in the precinct you work for belongs to me." The crowd gasped. Carter's face drained of color, his torch slipping from his hand. Brody stammered, "That's not, you can't." But the truth was dawning, heavy and undeniable. Marcus Grant wasn't just a man they could push around. He was the one who held the keys to their world. As the sheriff cuffed Carter and Brody, the townspeople watched in silence. Some looked ashamed, others awestruck. Marcus didn't care. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here for justice, not the kind that came from a badge, but the kind that came from standing tall when the world tried to burn you down. The fire died out. leaving only charred metal and the weight of what had happened. Marcus turned to the crowd, his voice steady but fierce. "This town's got a choice," he said. "You can keep living in the past, or you can build something better. I'm here to make sure it's the latter." He walked away, the ashes of his truck still smoldering behind him. Willow Creek would never be the same, and neither would Marcus. He'd lost a truck, but he'd gained something far greater: the chance to show a town and two broken men what real power looked like. It wasn't in a torch or a badge. It was in the courage to rise, to rebuild, and to remind the world that no one could take away what he'd earned: not his wealth, not his dignity, and not his fire. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.